Hot off the heels of his controversial Halloween trilogy, David Gordon Green's upcoming film, The Exorcist Believer, has finally gotten a trailer. Let's take a look at it. Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. Usually when a movie trailer comes out that I want to talk about, I'll just make a short and call it a day, but I had too much to say about the trailer for the new Exorcist movie, so I thought I'd take a crack at making a proper video about it. I'm deep in the weeds of working on a very long Halloween Ends review, but if you've seen my videos on Halloween 2018 and Kills, you'll know that I'm a massive fan of what David Gordon Green did with those movies, and yes, I'm also a fan of Ends. You'd expect, since I really vibe with how he handled that trilogy, that I'd be instantly hyped for this new Exorcist trilogy, but even I'm super skeptical of whether or not this is gonna work. The Exorcist is one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. It's a masterful example of what a possession movie should be, but it's also just pretty much a flawless film. Everything about it, from atmosphere to performances, characters, and everything else, it's all so goddamn good, and to this day, it really hasn't been replicated despite the immense library of attempts. Few films come anywhere even close to that original, but the third entry was absolutely fantastic, and The Exorcism of Emily Rose stands right by The Exorcist in my opinion. This kind of movie's really hard to get right because of how many times it's been done, but for the 50th anniversary of that seminal film, David Gordon Green is taking a swing at making a legacy sequel to kick off a trilogy. That's a weird move, if I'm being honest, man. The planned trilogy route for The Exorcist doesn't really make much sense. Hopefully what happens is that we've already got a story fully planned out, and I hope this feels more cohesive than the Halloween trilogy, which definitely suffered from a lack of planning things out beforehand. I really wasn't sure what to think about this movie because we had so little to go off of until very recently. The posters got a lot of shit, but I actually really liked the style they had. They definitely gave off the gritty vibe of the original that I wanted to see, so those images did a good job, at the very least, at grabbing my attention. Anyway, I'll stop babbling now and get to the actual trailer.
God played a trick on you.
It looks like this time around we'll be dealing not with one possessed child, but two. We see two young girls named Angela and Catherine go missing in the forest before being found 3 days later, and it looks like some spooky occult shit was going on in the woods. At the very least, I'm just glad to see they're not straight up retreading all the same beats as the original movie. We will have to wait and see how derivative this actually is, but I fuck with this premise. I'm liking some of the imagery we see, like the horse laying on the ground and the weird statues in what looks to be some part of a ritual. Once Angela and Catherine are found, it's pretty clear that something happened to them out there. The classic theme keeps getting teased in the way that every trailer for every legacy sequel must, but we also hear some other bits of score that don't sound half bad. It's fairly likely that the music in the trailer won't actually be in the movie, and I couldn't even find who's composing the soundtrack, which is bizarre. I'd love to see what, like, Joseph Bashara would do with an Exorcist score, but we'll have to wait and see who's actually going to be taking on that role. Maybe I just missed it, but I looked and I couldn't find a name. Something that I'm not so happy to see is that Believer looks too clean. The original was rough and gritty, which is in part a result of the time, but it doesn't look like any attempt to recreate that was made, and that's really disappointing. The Exorcist has a dirty look and feel that made it feel a lot more intense, and seeing a clean, modern look in the trailer makes me doubtful this will be able to come anywhere near the feel of the original movie. Something that's really tricky about making a possession movie these days is that because there are just so many, it's really hard to have scenes that feel fresh. There's a scene in the trailer where we see Catherine walking into church during service and she starts mocking the priest.
The body and the blood! Catherine! The body and the blood! The body and the blood!
How many movies have you seen where a young possessed girl repeats something over and over again while getting louder and louder and having a double voice? This has been done so many times, and the fact that something this unoriginal is shown in the first trailer for the movie, this is where we're supposed to start really building the hype. That makes me really concerned about how much this movie's actually going to have to offer. I don't want to see the best moments of a movie in the trailer, of course, but Universal is notorious for spoiling highlights, so if this kind of thing is indicative of what the movie will be like as a whole, eesh. This looks like it could be a decent scene if they execute it well, but I really hope they've got more up their sleeve than what we saw here. Now, of course, this is a Legacy sequel, and we get to see Ellen Burstyn reprising her role as Chris MacNeil. I've got to be completely honest, this bit of the trailer did give me goosebumps. After being teased for the whole trailer, the theme kicks in on a photo of a young Reagan, and then we see a photo of Chris from 1973 fade into her now. It looks like she gets tracked down by Angela's father to try and help save the two girls. There are some interesting possibilities presented here. Chris mentions how exorcism can vary from culture to culture, so that makes me wonder if they could be exploring possession rooted in different religions. That would add a whole layer of unknown to the situation. I'd love to see that idea explored. Now, one concern that comes with Legacy sequels is the reliance on nostalgia baiting, and there is a bit of that here, and it could go either way. I think it's hard to hit the right balance of bringing things full circle and giving significance by calling back to the past without falling into pure nostalgia bait. You look at something like Halloween Kills, for example, which definitely suffered from bringing back characters and giving them very little to do. They were just there as callbacks and could have easily been cut to focus more on giving the new story room to breathe. The thing that makes me bring this up is a moment here where Chris enters Catherine's room, and the demon calls back to what Reagan used to call her mother in the original, and then recreates that insane scene. I'm not completely against the idea of this being the same demon from the original, or even something else pretending to be the same, but what I really hope this doesn't mean is that there will be a bunch of scenes that are just recreations of iconic moments from the first movie. That sort of thing comes with the territory of Legacy sequels, and I think it works better for some franchises, but for The Exorcist, an over-reliance on these moments doesn't really make much sense. I mean, an over-reliance doesn't make sense for any franchise, but I think you know what I'm saying. I'm not saying this movie is going to do that. It does look like we'll have plenty of original moments, and it's taking a different approach than the first movie did. And, you know, I also understand why they'd show those bits in the trailer. You gotta get people into the theater. And it's totally fine to sprinkle in some fan service, but what I really want to see is for this trilogy to explore the world of exorcism in its own way. We're definitely aware by now that David Gordon Green has no qualms with taking things in new directions. Love it or hate it, it takes balls to take an iconic franchise and veer it off into strange territory, and him doing that makes me more confident that his trilogy will still do its own thing, despite all the references that we see in this trailer. They even wrote Mother on the wall. Fuck me, please don't let this be as on the nose as it looks. We'll be heading back over to the Middle East, which I'm super interested in. The first movie had its opening scene take place in Iraq, and I'd love to see more done with that kind of setting. There's a few flashes of some really great imagery. I stand by that. Despite what you think about David Gordon Green's writing, his direction is fantastic, and that shows here. This scene here looks a lot better than the one in the church, thankfully.
Is that Catherine's heartbeat?
They're beating in sync.
I do hope that the voices aren't overly digital for the entire movie, because the ones in the original were absolutely terrifying in their uncanniness, and at least this example here isn't too egregious. I'm sure there's going to be some like digital augmentation, but I don't want the voices to be too unbelievable. What made the ones in the first movie creepy is that Reagan could have been doing that. It's very unlikely, but it's possible, and I don't want this movie to lose that. The trailer closes off in a fucking awesome homage to what William Friedkin has called the greatest trailer ever made for The Exorcist. This trailer was actually blocked by the studio back in the day because they were afraid it would be too intense, and it also clearly presented epilepsy risks. It's a great fucking trailer though, and I was really glad to see that sort of thing come back at the end. The title card is nice and old school, and overall, that's a great way to end things. I have mixed feelings about this trailer. It'll be impossible to fully recapture the magic of the first movie, especially because, you know, this is made with modern technology and everything looks so clean, and there was too much cultural significance to the first Exorcist. You're not gonna get that again. And I do have concerns about how much it's gonna rely on callbacks, but There is stuff in here that gives me hope. I like the idea of having 2 possessed girls, and I'm very intrigued by the idea of them going missing for days and finding occult stuff in the woods. The performances look good, the makeup on the kids is fantastic, and it looks pretty intense. I would love to see them explore the medical and psychological elements that were a lot more prevalent in the book. For every seemingly paranormal thing that happened, they would always reference some documented case of the same thing happening where it was scientifically explained, at least to some degree. That added a really interesting layer of doubt and confusion that wasn't emphasized nearly as much in the movie, and I think that would be a really cool angle for this new one to explore. I don't imagine that will be the case, but it is something about the book that I really love, so I think it would be cool if that got more of a focus. I think the biggest thing that needs to happen in order for this movie to work is that everyone involved needs to understand that the first movie was a story-first experience, and the horror came consequentially with the way the narrative played out. Where most possession movies fuck up is by trying too hard to be scary when they should be focused on building up a world and characters to get invested in that makes the things that happen along the way frightening. That's what made the first movie so impactful, and I really hope Believer can nail that. A lot of the moments in the trailer end with the possessed girls screaming and freaking out, which wasn't the focus of that first movie. Yeah, it had its intense moments, but some of the most compelling parts were quiet conversations between Father Karras and the possessed Reagan, or, brief flashes of faces in the dark. Those quieter moments are just as, if not more important to what made The Exorcist so great, so I'm hoping we'll have more bits like that in the new one. Something that's worth talking about is that this movie will be fighting an uphill battle. The fact is that after his Halloween trilogy, David Gordon Green's name is a red flag for a lot of people, and his attachment to this project means that a lot of viewers will go in already hating this movie. The concerns are completely valid too, because for people who are deeply passionate about The Exorcist, seeing the weird shit he did with Halloween Ends in particular is a huge concern for them. This movie's starting from rock bottom for a lot of people, and unfortunately, it's gonna have to go above and beyond before those folks will even consider it halfway decent because of his reputation. Even though I'm a huge fan of David Gordon Green's Halloween films, it doesn't necessarily mean I'll like what he does with The Exorcist. That movie is pretty much perfect, and for me, I'd stay the hell away from it at all costs. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't really looking forward to seeing the movie. I'm actually super excited for the trilogy as a whole, because I was sad thinking about the ride of Halloween movies being over, so even with my many reservations, I'm just hyped to see something as iconic as The Exorcist fill that spot. Let me know your thoughts on this trailer, as well as the trilogy as a whole, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.